The chandelier above the grand ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel fractured the light into 1,000 jagged diamonds, echoing the state of my heart. I smoothed the silk of my bespoke midnight blue gown, the fabric cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the 300 socialites swirling around me. Tonight was our 5th wedding anniversary and the 10th anniversary of the GU Group's founding. I had built this empire from a 2-room apartment, coding until my fingers bled while GU Yangshan handled the face of the company. Today, the GU Group was a titan of industry, and today, I was an uninvited guest at my own celebration. "Ruoshi, you're late," a cold, baritone voice clipped the air behind me. I turned. GU Yangshan stood there, the epitome of the aloof CEO in his charcoal Tom Ford suit. His features were carved from ice-sharp jawline, eyes like frozen lakes, and a mouth that rarely curved into a smile for me anymore. But his arm wasn't empty. Clinging to his sleeve like a delicate vine was Lin Shuyu, his junior assistant. She was dressed in virginal white, her eyes wide and watery, the perfect white lotus foil to my calculated elegance. I was finishing the audit for the Southeast Asian merger. "Yangshan," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse hammered against my ribs, "the one that secures our top-tier market valuation." Yangshan didn't even look at the file in my hand. He adjusted his cufflink, his gaze distant. "Shuyu told me you'd be obsessing over spreadsheets again. She said a woman who can't distinguish between a boardroom and a bedroom eventually loses both." It seems she was right. Lin Shuyu let out a tiny, practiced gasp, hiding her smirk behind a manicured hand. "Oh, Sister Ruoshi, I didn't mean it like that. I just thought, Yangshan works so hard. He deserves a partner who brings him peace, not more paperwork." The surrounding guests began to whisper. The Queen of Finance being lectured by a girl who couldn't balance a checkbook. I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, but beneath it, something else was hardening, a cold, crystalline clarity. "Peace," I smiled, a thin, dangerous line. "Is that what we're calling corporate negligence now?" Yangshan's eyes darkened. He stepped closer, his scent of sandalwood and arrogance filling my space. "Enough, Ruoshi. You've always been too ambitious, too controlling. You think this company breathes because of you. Look around, the investors are happy, the stock is at an all-time high, Shuyu has been handling the PR, and frankly, the image of the GU Group is better without your iron fist approach." He leaned in, his voice a lethal whisper that only I could hear. "The truth is, this company has outgrown you. It's reached a level of prestige where your grit is just unsightly. This company doesn't need you anymore. In fact, nobody here does." The ballroom went silent. He hadn't bothered to keep the last part quiet. The humiliation was a physical weight, a collective gasp rippling through the crowd. Lin Shuyu preened, tucking her head onto his shoulder. "Is that your final assessment, Yangshan?" I asked. My hand reached into my clutch, touching the cold edge of a fountain pen. "It is. If you want to keep your dignity, leave through the back. I'll have my lawyers send the transition papers tomorrow. You're being phased out, Ruoshi." Gracefully, or otherwise, I felt a strange sensation then. It wasn't pain, it was the feeling of a tether finally snapping. For 5 years, I had been the silent engine, the ghost in the machine, the wife who smoothed over every scandal and secured every loan using my own family's ancestral trust as collateral. 5 minutes, I said softly. Yangshan frowned. "What? In 5 minutes, you'll realize the difference between peace and emptiness." I pulled out a single, folded document, not a transition paper, but a revocation of capital and intellectual property rights. I had drafted it months ago, a break glass in case of emergency measure I prayed I'd never use. I signed it with a flourish, the ink black as a funeral shroud. I walked over to the buffet table, picked up a glass of vintage Cristal, and tapped it with a spoon. The chime rang out, piercing the murmurs. "Attention, everyone," I called out. My voice didn't shake, it commanded. As the primary shareholder and sole guarantor of the GU Group's current credit line, I have an announcement. Yangshan's face went from pale to ashen. "Ruoshi, sit down, don't make a scene, too late for that, darling," I said, checking my watch. "I am officially announcing my immediate and total divestment from the GU Group. Every cent of the Ruoshi Trust, which constitutes 65% of your operating liquidity, is being withdrawn as of now." I hit send on a pre-timed email on my phone. A collective cell phone chime echoed through the room. Every board member, every investor, Every journalist received the notification simultaneously. "What have you done?" Yangshan lunged for my arm, but I stepped back, my smile widening. "I'm proving your theory, Yangshan. You said the company doesn't need me, so let's see how it fares without my money, my patents, and my reputation." The big screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of GU Group's achievements, suddenly flickered. The live stock ticker began to roll. It didn't just dip, it plummeted. $240, $180, $115. "The bank," cried Old Man Chen, the lead investor. "They just pulled our short-term credit." Ruoshi was the guarantor. "The AI logistics patent," someone else shouted. "It's been deauthorized." The entire shipping fleet just went offline. Chaos erupted. The happy investors were now a mob of panicked billionaires. Lin Shuyu shrieked as someone bumped into her, her glass of red wine spilling all over her virginal white dress. She looked like she'd been caught in a massacre. Yangshan stared at the screen, his face twisted in a mask of disbelief. He looked at his phone, which was vibrating uncontrollably with calls from the SEC and the bank. "Ruoshi, stop this. Call them back. We can talk about this," he stammered, his aloof persona shattering into a million pathetic pieces. "Talk." I walked toward the exit, the crowd parting for me like the Red Sea. "I think Shuyu can handle it. After all, she brings you peace, right?" I stopped at the heavy oak doors and looked back one last time. Yangshan was on his knees, staring at the ticker as it hit $12. The GU Group, the titan of industry, was effectively bankrupt in less time than it took to serve the appetizers. "By the way, Yangshan," I added, my voice echoing in the sudden, horrified silence of the room, "the house is in my name, too." I'd start packing. "But you probably can't afford the boxes." I walked out into the cool night air, the sound of his first sob reaching my ears just as the doors closed. The moon was high, sharp, and for the first time in 5 years, I could finally breathe. The night air outside the Peninsula Hotel was crisp. But inside the GU Group headquarters, 30 floors up, the atmosphere was pressurized enough to make ears pop. It was 2:00 a.m. Usually, this floor was a sanctuary of silent, blue-lit servers and the hum of success. Tonight, it was a war room where everyone was losing. I stepped out of the private elevator, my heels clicking a steady, rhythmic death march against the marble floor. I had changed out of my gala gown into a sharp, ivory power suit, the color of a clean slate. The boardroom doors swung open before I could touch them. GU Yangshan was there, his tie undone, his hair disheveled. He looked 10 years older than he had 2 hours ago. Surrounding him were the vultures, the board of directors, led by Old Man Chen, whose face was a shade of purple that suggested a looming stroke. "Ruoshi." "Thank God." Chen scrambled toward me, his hands shaking. "Tell them it was a glitch. Tell the banks you made a clerical error. The market opens in Tokyo in 4 hours. If we don't restore the credit line, the GU Group is a memory." I walked to the head of the table, the seat Yangshan usually occupied. I didn't sit. I leaned against the back of the chair, looking at them with the detached curiosity of a scientist watching a failing experiment. "It wasn't a glitch, Mr. Chen," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "It was a divorce, not just from Yangshan, but from all of you who sat silently while he sidelined the person who actually generated your dividends." Yangshan slammed his palm onto the mahogany table. "Ruoshi, stop this madness. You're hurting yourself too. You own shares. You're burning your own house down just to see me cough from the smoke." "Oh, Yangshan," I chuckled, a cold, dry sound. "You always did underestimate my foresight. I sold my personal equity to a private equity firm in Zurich 3 weeks ago. I don't own a single plummeting share of the GU Group. I only own the debt, and right now, I'm your biggest creditor." The room went deathly silent. Yangshan's eyes widened, the aloof mask finally cracking to reveal the sheer terror beneath. He turned to Lawyer Zhong, his shark-like legal counsel who usually specialized in silencing whistleblowers. "Zhong, freeze her accounts, sue for breach of fiduciary duty, do something," Yangshan roared. Lawyer Zhong didn't look up from his laptop. His face was pale. I can't, Mr. GU, Mrs. GU've pardon me, MS. Shen didn't just withdraw capital. She exercised the key person clause in the intellectual property agreements. Since she is the registered inventor of the core AI logistics algorithm, and since the company no longer requires her services, the license to use that tech revoked automatically upon her termination. What does that mean in plain English? Old man Chen hissed. It means, I intervened, leaning forward so my shadow fell over Yangshan, that as of 5 minutes ago, your entire automated shipping fleet stopped moving. Your warehouses don't know where the goods are, your global supply chain just suffered a lobotomy, and since I own the patents personally, using them now would be a federal crime. Just then, the door creaked open. Lin Shuyu stepped in, clutching a tray of coffee. She had changed into a modest, oversized sweater, playing the part of the tireless, supportive waif. I brought everyone some caffeine, she whispered, her voice trembling beautifully. Yangshan, don't worry. I've been calling the PR firms. We can spin this as a restructuring. We'll tell the press that Ruoshi is mentally unstable due to the divorce. I turned my gaze toward her. Shuyu flinched. Restructuring. Shuyu, I asked, walking toward her. Tell me, do you know the difference between a Tier 1 capital ratio and a leveraged buyout? Do you know how to reroute a neutralized server farm without the master encryption keys? Shuyu stammered, looking at Yangshan for help. I provide emotional support. I handle the soft side of the business. The soft side is currently worth $0. I snapped. I snatched a coffee cup from her tray and poured it slowly, deliberately, onto the floor at her feet. Clean that up. It's the only thing in this room you're actually qualified to handle. Ruoshi, that's enough. Yangshan stood up, trying to reclaim his dominance. You've made your point. You're angry. You've crashed the stock. You've embarrassed me. Now, give us the keys back. I'll give you a generous settlement, more than you're worth. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and wondered how I had ever mistaken his arrogance for strength. You still don't get it, I said, shaking my head. You think this is a negotiation. It's an autopsy. I didn't come here to save the company. I came here to take the furniture. I turned to Lawyer Zhong. Deliver the notice of default, since the GU Group cannot meet its margin call by 3:00 a.m. I am triggering the immediate seizure of the collateral assets, which, if you recall the contract I had Yangshan sign while he was too busy to read it last year, includes this building and the GU family estate. Yangshan's face drained of all color. You tricked me. You had me sign that during the merger gala last year. I didn't trick you, Yangshan. I told you it was a secondary security filing. You were too busy flirting with the interns to read the fine print. You told me then. Just handle it, Ruoshi. I don't have time for the boring stuff. Well, I smiled. I handled it. Old man Chen collapsed back into his chair, gasping for air. The other board members began shouting at each other, pointing fingers, the once august body devolving into a pack of panicked animals. I picked up my briefcase and headed for the door. Where are you going? Yangshan yelled, his voice cracking. You can't just leave. The company is dying. You said it yourself, Yangshan. I called back over my shoulder, the heavy doors beginning to swing shut. This company doesn't need me anymore, so I'm going to go find someone who does, or better yet, I'll just find myself. As I stepped into the elevator, I saw through the closing gap. Yangshan was frantically trying to grab Shuyu's phone to call the bank, while Shuyu was backed into a corner, crying about her ruined sweater. The elevator pinged, the floor dropped, the GU Group was falling, and for the first time in my life, I was the one going up. The rain didn't just fall, it hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Emerald Bay mansion, a rhythmic drumming that sounded like nails being driven into a coffin. This house, a 3,000-square-foot monument to minimalist luxury and emotional vacuum, was supposed to be our sanctuary. Instead, it felt like a museum of a life I had outgrown. I walked through the foyer, my footsteps echoing against the white Italian marble. I didn't turn on the lights. The intermittent flashes of lightning provided all the illumination I needed. Stark, jagged, and honest, I was upstairs in the master suite, tossing the few things that actually belonged to me into a Rimowa suitcase. When the front door slammed downstairs, the vibrations rattled the crystal perfume bottles on my vanity. Ruoshi, Jiyu Yenshin's voice was ragged, stripped of its usual boardroom polish. I heard him stumbling, the heavy thud of his shoulder hitting the wall as he made his way up the stairs. When he burst into the bedroom, he looked like a man who had crawled out of a shipwreck. His suit was soaked, his tie was gone, and his eyes were bloodshot with a mix of exhaustion and feral rage. Stop this, he gasped, leaning against the doorframe. Stop this tantrum right now. I've spent the last 3 hours on the phone with the bank. They've frozen my personal lines because of your default notice. Do you have any idea how much of a laughingstock I am? I didn't stop folding my silk shirts. A laughingstock? No, Yangshan. You're a casualty. There's a difference. You're insane. He lunged forward, grabbing my wrist to stop me from packing. His grip was cold and desperate. We've been married for 5 years. I gave you everything, the name, the status, this house, and you're going to throw it all away because I gave a little attention to an assistant, because I told you the truth about the company's image. I looked down at his hand on my wrist, then up into his eyes. You didn't give me this house. Yangshan, my design patents paid for the mortgage. You didn't give me the status. My family's reputation opened the doors your father's scandals closed. And as for everything, I twisted my arm out of his grasp with a sharp, practiced motion. You gave me nothing but a front row seat to my own erasure. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Your family's reputation. Don't make me sick. Your father was a scholar who died with $10 in his pocket. It was my father, Jiu Zhan, who took you in. He built the foundation. Is that what he told you? I walked over to the built-in bookshelf and pressed a hidden release behind a volume of The Wealth of Nations. A small, fireproof safe clicked open. Yangshan froze. What is that? I didn't even know that was there. Of course you didn't. You only see the surfaces of things. I pulled out a weathered, leather-bound ledger and a digital drive. Your father didn't take me in out of charity. He embezzled my father's research funds and patented the early algorithms under his own name. He stole my inheritance before I was old enough to sign a contract. I found the proof 3 years ago. I tossed the ledger onto the bed. Yangshan's hands shook as he flipped through the pages, the forged signatures, the backdated transfers. His face turned a ghostly shade of gray. I stayed because I thought I could fix you, I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I made the GU group successful enough, I could pay back the world for what your father stole. I was protecting you from the truth of your own legacy. But tonight, I realized, you're exactly like him. You think the world owes you brilliance you didn't earn. This can't be real, Yangshan stammered, his knees buckling as he sat on the edge of the bed. My father was a hero of the industry. Your father was a thief, and you are a ghost. I walked over to the wall where a massive, abstract oil painting hung, a gift from Yangshan for our 3rd anniversary. It was titled The Core, supposedly representing our shared strength. I knew for a fact he'd had his secretary pick it out at a gallery auction while he was in Vegas. I picked up a decorative brass lighter from the nightstand. What are you doing? Yangshan stood up, alarm crossing his face. Removing the clutter, I flicked the flame and held it to the corner of the canvas. The oil-rich fabric ignited instantly. The flames licking upward, turning the symbol of our marriage into a blackened, curling void. Are you crazy? That cost $500,000. It's a tax write-off, Yangshan. Just like you, I zipped my suitcase shut. The smoke began to fill the room, acrid and heavy, but I didn't cough. It felt like the air was finally being purified. Downstairs, the butler, Wang, appeared at the base of the stairs, looking panicked. He had been with the GU family for 20 years. He looked at me. Then at the flickering orange glow coming from the master suite. Madam, Ms. Shin, where are you going? He asked, his voice trembling. The locks will be changed by noon tomorrow. Wang, I said, pausing at the front door. I've already transferred your pension and a severance bonus to your private account. You've been a loyal servant to a house built on sand. I suggest you leave before the tide comes in. Wang looked at the stairs, then back at me. He bowed deeply, a bow of respect I had never received from any member of the GU family. Safe travels, Miss Shin. I stepped out into the rain. Behind me, Yangshan came stumbling out onto the portico, shouting my name, his voice breaking as he realized the gates were already closing. He stood there in the downpour, a ruined king of a hollow kingdom. As I pulled my car out of the driveway, I saw him in the rearview mirror, a small, dark figure shrinking into the distance. Framed by the smoke of a dying lie, I reached over and turned on the radio. A upbeat jazz track filled the car, and for the first time in a decade, I started to hum along. The roar of high-octane engines drowned out the lingering echoes of GU Yangshan's pleas. I arrived at the Abyss, an exclusive, underground racing circuit carved into the side of the Blackwood Mountains. This wasn't a place for the refined elite, it was a playground for the restless, the dangerous, and the truly powerful. Here, status wasn't bought with a corporate title, it was earned at 200 miles per hour. I stepped out of my car, the scent of burnt rubber and expensive fuel acting like smelling salts to my weary brain. I needed the adrenaline. I needed to feel the world moving faster than my thoughts. Shunruoshi, I heard you burned down a kingdom tonight. A man leaned against a matte black Pagani Huayra, his silhouette sharp against the neon floodlights. This was Lu Jingshan. If Jiyu Yangshan was the ice of the business world, Lu Jingshan was the dark matter, silent, omnipresent, and devastatingly cold. His family was the Jiyu Group's primary rival, but Lu himself operated on a different plane. He didn't just want market share, he wanted total dominance. The kingdom was infested with termites. Mr. Lu, I replied, walking toward him. I simply did the world a favor. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned my face. You don't look like a woman who just lost everything. You look like a woman who just realized she was carrying too much luggage. Before I could answer, the screech of tires announced a new arrival. A silver Ferrari 812 skidded to a halt just inches from us, throwing gravel against my boots. Jiyu Yangshan climbed out, his eyes wild, his shirt half unbuttoned. He had tracked my car's GPS. Ruoshi, get in the car, Yangshan yelled, ignoring Lu Jingshan entirely. You've had your fun, you've had your little independent moment, but you're making a scene in front of the wrong people. Do you have any idea who Lu Jingshan is? He'll eat you alive now that you don't have the Jiyu name to protect you. I looked at Yangshan, at the desperation masked as paternalistic rage, and then at Lu Jingshan, who looked mildly bored. He thinks I'm the one who needs protection, I said to Lu, a slow smile spreading across my face. Lu Jingshan tilted his head, a flicker of genuine interest appearing in his eyes. Does he? How? Quaint, Yangshan, I said, turning to my husband. You've spent 5 years telling me I'm just the brains in the background. You think I'm soft, you think I'm fragile. You want your money back, you want the patents. Yangshan straightened his posture, sensing a negotiation. Yes, give them back, and we can settle this quietly. I'll even let you keep the mansion. Let's make it interesting, I said. My voice dropping to a dangerous register, a one-on-one race, 3 laps around the abyss. If you win, I sign over the debt and the patents. You get your empire back. Yangshan's face lit up with arrogant relief. He had been a semi-pro racer in college. He spent his weekends at tracks while I spent mine in server rooms. And when you lose, because you will, if I win, I said, leaning in closer, you sign a full, unconditional divorce settlement. You waive all rights to any future intellectual property I create, and you admit in front of everyone here that the GU Group was nothing without me. Deal, Yangshan snapped, eyes gleaming. He thought he'd already won. Lu Jingshan stepped forward, tossing a set of keys to me. It was for a modified McLaren P1, a car so powerful it was practically a low-flying jet. Don't scratch it, MS, Shun, it's my favorite. The crowd at the track, mechanics, heirs, and thrill-seekers gathered at the starting line. The tension was a living thing, vibrating in the humid mountain air. Yangshan revved his Ferrari, the engine screaming a challenge. I sat in the cockpit of the McLaren, my hands steady on the Alcantara steering wheel. The flag dropped. Yangshan took the lead immediately, his car fishtailing as he pushed it to the limit. He was driving with the fury of a man trying to outrun his own bankruptcy. I stayed on his tail, watching the way he took the corners, too wide, too aggressive, relying on the car's power rather than the road's physics. Always the same, Yangshan, I whispered, shifting gears. You drive like you lead blindly. On the second lap, at the devil's elbow, a hairpin turn over a 500-foot drop. Yangshan tried to block my line. I didn't brake, I accelerated. The crowd roared as I dived into the inside lane, my tires inches from the abyss. I felt the G-force pulling at my skin, the world blurring into a streak of neon and shadow. I passed him on the apex. By the third lap, I wasn't just winning, I was humiliating him. I crossed the finish line a full 6 seconds ahead. When I pulled into the pit, I didn't even have a bead of sweat on my forehead. Yangshan's Ferrari came to a screeching, clumsy halt behind me. He jumped out, his face pale and sweating. You cheated. That car, Lu Jingshan gave you a car that's illegal for this track. A poor workman always blames his tools. Yangshan, I said, stepping out of the McLaren. Lu Jingshan walked over, a pen and a clipboard in his hand. He looked at Yangshan with utter contempt. She didn't cheat, she just understood the friction coefficients better than you did. Now, sign the papers. A deal at the abyss is more binding than a blood oath. Yangshan looked around at the mocking faces of the crowd. He realized then that he hadn't just lost his company and his wife, he had lost his reputation in the only world that still respected him. With trembling hands, he signed. As he finished, I leaned in and whispered, "The funny thing is, Yangshan, I've been practicing on this track for years. While you were out networking with girls like Shuyu, I was learning how to handle the curves you never saw coming." I turned to Lu Jingshan and handed him the keys. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Lu." "The pleasure was mine, Ruoshi," he said, using my first name for the first time. His voice was like velvet over steel. "I think this is the beginning of a very expensive friendship." I walked away, leaving Yangshan standing by his car, a broken man in a silver cage. While the first light of dawn began to bleed over the mountains, I wasn't just free, I was flying. The air in the grand atrium of the National Art Museum smelled of expensive lilies and the metallic tang of overeager paparazzi. It was Fashion Week, and the city's elite had gathered for the most anticipated show of the season, the unveiling of the Phoenix collection by the legendary Madame Vivi. I arrived not as Shin Ruoshi, the disgraced ex-wife of a failing CEO, but as a ghost. I wore an architectural gown of structured obsidian, my hair pulled back so tightly it emphasized the predatory sharpness of my cheekbones. I hadn't been seen in public for weeks, and the whispers followed me like a physical wake. "Is that her? The one who tanked the GU group? She looks different, like she's made of glass and lightning." I ignored them, making my way to the front row. My seat was directly across from the runway's start, and there, sitting in what used to be my usual spot, were Jiyu Yangshan and Lin Shuyu. Yangshan looked haggard. Despite the expensive suit he was clearly using to hide his fraying edges, beside him, Shuyu was a riot of pink tulle and desperation. She was covered in borrowed jewels, her face plastered with a triumphant grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sister Ruoshi," Shuyu called out, her voice carrying across the silent hall, "I'm so glad you could make it. I know things have been difficult for you lately." Yangshan was so worried you'd be hiding in some dark corner, so he insisted I take your place here to keep the GU name prominent. Yangshan didn't look at me, he stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. "Shuyu is being considered for the new face of Madame Vivi's brand," he said, his voice forced. "It's a fresh start for the company's image, something soft, something approachable." I sat down, crossing my legs with a slow, deliberate grace. "Approachable. Is that the new corporate euphemism for mediocre?" Shuyu's smile faltered. "You're just bitter. Tonight, when I walk the finale as the brand's muse, everyone will see that the GU group doesn't need a cold, calculating machine at the helm. They need heart. Heart is a liability in a sinking ship." "Shuyu," I said, opening my program, "but please, do enjoy your moment. It's likely to be a very short one." The lights dimmed, the music a pounding, industrial beat began. The models blurred past, but the energy in the room was off. The Phoenix collection was supposed to be a masterpiece of innovation, but the garments looked dated, the stitching was sloppy, the fabrics looked cheap. I leaned back, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. I knew exactly why. Madame Vivi's innovative new textile, a self-cooling silk, was based on a patent that had been part of my divestment. Without my authorization, she had been forced to use a synthetic substitute at the last minute. Finally, the music shifted, the grand finale began. Shuyu stood up, shedding her wrap to reveal a shimmering gold gown that was supposed to be the showstopper. She stepped onto the runway, blowing kisses to the cameras, playing the part of the darling ingenue. Halfway down the catwalk, the bright stage lights hit the gold fabric. Under the intense heat, the synthetic substitute began to react. The gold started to warp and pill, the hemline sagging visibly as the cheap fibers lost their tension. The whispers turned into muffled laughter. Shuyu, sensing something was wrong, tried to adjust her pose, but the more she moved, the more the dress disintegrated. A strap snapped. The bodice began to slide. "What is this?" Madame Vivi hissed from the wings, her voice caught by a nearby microphone. I stood up, the movement drawing every camera in the room toward me. I didn't look at the shivering Shuyu on the stage, I looked at the crowd. "This," I said, my voice projecting with the authority of a queen, "is what happens when you try to build a legacy on stolen, second-rate foundations." I walked toward the stage, the security guards started to move. But I held up a single gold card, the black card of the Aura conglomerate. "Madame Vivi," I called out, 10 minutes ago, I closed the deal. I didn't just buy the front row, I bought the fashion house. I am now the majority owner of Vivi International. The room went silent. Yangshan stood up, his face a mask of horror. You did what? With what money? With the money I made shorting your stock. Yangshan, I said, stepping onto the runway. I walked right up to Shuyu, who was clutching her failing dress to her chest, her face red with humiliation. I reached out and plucked a loose thread from her shoulder, and as the new owner, I find this muse to be off-brand. She's wearing a counterfeit, not just of the dress, but of a lifestyle she hasn't earned. I turned to the head of security. Escort this woman out, and take the dress back. It's an insult to the mannequins. Shuyu burst into tears, her white lotus act finally dissolving into a panicked, ugly sob as she was led away in front of the world's most influential press. Yangshan moved to intervene, but I blocked his path. Don't, Yangshan, you're already trespassing on my property. The invitations for this event were issued by the previous management. As of now, you and the GU Group are officially blacklisted from every Aura-affiliated event globally. Ruoshi, you're being vindictive, Yangshan hissed, his eyes darting to the cameras. You're destroying people's lives for a grudge. No. Yangshan, I whispered, leaning in so the cameras could see my serene, victorious smile but not hear my words. I'm not destroying lives, I'm just letting the trash take itself out. You told me the company didn't need me, I'm just making sure the rest of the world agrees with you. I turned my back on him and walked toward the backstage area. As I passed the front row, Lu Jingshan was standing there, clapping slowly. His eyes were burning with an intensity that made the room feel even hotter. A masterclass, Ruoshi, he murmured as I passed, but you missed one thing. Oh, I paused. You should have let the dress fall off completely. It would have been more poetic. I'm a businesswoman, Lu, I replied, not looking back. I don't believe in giving away a free show. I walked into the darkness of the wings, the sound of 1,000 shutters clicking behind me like the applause of a world that was finally starting to see me for who I really was. The grand hall of the Starlight Auction House was bathed in the soft, deceptive glow of 1,000 beeswax candles. The air was thick with the scent of aged cognac and the predatory musk of old money. This was the Star of the Orient Gala, a night where the desperate come to liquidate their legacies and the powerful come to feast on the remains. I arrived on the arm of Lu Jingshan. He was a pillar of shadow in a bespoke midnight tux, his presence alone causing a localized hush to fall over the room. I wore a gown of liquid silver that clung to my skin like a second layer of armor. My neck was bare. I didn't need jewels to announce my worth anymore. Look at him, Lu Jingshan murmured, his voice a low vibration near my ear. A drowning man trying to sell the anchor. At the far end of the champagne reception stood Jiyu Yangshan. He looked like a ghost of his former self. His suit was expensive, but it hung loosely on his frame, and the aloof coldness in his eyes had been replaced by the frantic, darting gaze of a cornered animal. Beside him, Lin Shuyu was practically invisible, her attempts at social climbing thwarted by the blacklisted status I had stamped on her forehead at the fashion show. Yangshan spotted us. He stiffened, then began to walk over, his glass of scotch trembling slightly. Ruoshi, he said, his voice gravelly, I didn't think you'd have the nerve to show your face here. This is a private auction for the city's founding families, not for new money upstarts. The Star of the Orient is a beautiful diamond. Yangshan, I said, ignoring his jab, it's been in the GU family for 4 generations. It's a shame your father's son is the one who has to put it under the hammer to pay off a margin call. Yangshan's face flushed a deep, ugly red. I'm not selling it out of desperation. I'm reallocating assets. Once the sale goes through, the GU Group will have the liquidity to sue you into the dirt for the intellectual property you stole. Lu Jingshan stepped forward, his shadow engulfing Yangshan. Mr. GU, be careful with your choice of words. Ms. Shan didn't steal your company's future, she was your company's future. You just didn't have the vision to see it. Stay out of this. Lu, Yangshan hissed. This is a family matter. You lost the right to call her family the moment you brought a mistress to your anniversary gala. Lu replied coldly. The chime rang, signaling the start of the auction. We took our seats in the VIP velvet chairs. Yangshan sat in the front row, his back rigid, waiting for his salvation. The Star of the Orient, a 45-carat blue diamond, was the final lot. The auctioneer, a man with a voice like polished mahogany, Began the bidding at $50 million, $60 million, a voice called out. 70, another followed. Yangshan looked relieved. The price was climbing. He needed at least $120 million to keep the banks from seizing his remaining warehouses. $100 million, I said, raising my paddle with a flick of my wrist. The room gasped. Yangshan turned around, his eyes wide. He thought I was trying to buy back a piece of his family. He thought I was still sentimental. He signaled to a proxy bidder he had hired a secret buyer meant to drive the price up so he could pocket the difference in a complex shell game scheme. $110 million. The proxy called out, 130. I counted instantly. Lu Jingshan leaned over, a smirk playing on his lips. You're playing with your food, Ruoshi. I'm hungry. I whispered back. 150 million. Yangshan's proxy shouted. Getting caught up in the heat, the room was buzzing. This was a record-breaking price. Yangshan was sweating. If the secret buyer, his own man, won at this price, Yangshan would have to pay the auction house commission on money he didn't actually have, but he was gambling that I would go even higher. He thought I wanted to win against him. 180 million, I said, my voice clear and calm. Yangshan's eyes gleamed with greed. He signaled his proxy one last time. He wanted to bleed me dry. He wanted me to pay 200 million for a rock he hated. 200 million, the proxy yelled, standing up. The auctioneer looked at me. The room held its breath. Yangshan was leaning forward, a triumphant sneer beginning to form. He was thinking, I've got her. She'll bid 210, and I'll walk away with a fortune. I lowered my paddle. I picked up my champagne glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. Going once, the auctioneer called, going twice. Yangshan's sneer froze. He looked at me, his mouth falling open. Bid, damn you, his eyes screamed. Sold, to the gentleman in the third row for $200 million. The gavel cracked like a gunshot. The silence that followed was deafening. The gentleman was Yangshan's own proxy, in his greed to drive the price up for me. Yangshan had just bought his own diamond for a price he couldn't afford. I stood up and walked toward him as the crowd began to murmur in confusion. Congratulations. Yangshan, I said, my voice dripping with faux sweetness. You just set a world record, of course. The auction house requires a 10% buyer's premium in cash immediately. That's $20 million. Do you have that in your pocket, or should I call the credit investigators? You stopped, Yangshan stammered, his face turning the color of ash. You were supposed to bid again. Why would I want a blue diamond? Yangshan, I leaned in, my voice a lethal whisper. I already have the Star of the Orient. I'm the one who polished it for 5 years while you were busy trying to dim my light. I didn't come here to buy the stone. I came here to make sure you defaulted. A group of black-suited security men approached Yangshan. Mr. Gu, we need to verify the funds for the buyer's premium. Now, I can explain, Yangshan began, but they were already ushering him toward the back office. The secret was out. The great Gu Yangshan had tried to shill his own auction and failed. His credit, already fragile, was now officially dead. Lin Shuyu tried to follow him, but I stepped in her way. The exit is that way. Shuyu, I pointed to the service door. Try not to trip on your way out. I hear the sidewalks are quite hard this time of year. I turned back to Lu Jingshan, who was waiting by the door with my coat. That was cruel, he said, though his eyes were dancing with delight. No, I said. Slipping my arms into the silk-lined wool, that was accounting. He owed me for the 5 years of my life he wasted. I think we're finally even on the interest. As we walked out into the cool night, the sound of Yangshan's frantic explanations fading behind us, I felt a weight lift. I wasn't just winning a game. I was erasing a ghost. The walls of the inquiry chamber were a sterile, intimidating shade of gray, designed to make the guilty crumble and the innocent tremble. High above, the state seal loomed over the long mahogany bench where Inspector Han sat, his spectacles glinting like twin blades. This wasn't a boardroom or a ballroom. This was a place where the law stripped away the glamour of high finance to reveal the rot beneath. I sat on the left side of the aisle, my posture perfect. A charcoal gray power suit making me look like a part of the architecture. On the right, Gu Yangshan looked like a man who had been dragged through a thresher. His skin was sallow. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets to hide their tremors, and his legal team looked like they were already planning their exit strategies. This hearing is now in session, Inspector Han announced, his voice echoing in the hallowed silence. The matter at hand is the sudden and catastrophic collapse of the GU Group, and the allegations of criminal financial sabotage brought forth by Mr. GU Yangshan against his former partner and spouse, Ms. Shun Ruoshi. Yangshan stood up abruptly. His chair screeching against the floor. It wasn't just sabotage, Inspector, it was a premeditated strike. She withdrew 60% of our liquidity in a single night. She revoked essential patents. She deliberately engineered a market crash to settle a personal grudge. My company, a cornerstone of this city's economy, is in ruins because of her vindictiveness. He turned to me, his eyes burning with a desperate, localized fire. She used her position as CFO to plant traps in our contracts. She's a predator who fed on the very hand that fed her. Inspector Han turned his gaze toward me. Ms. Shin, your response. I stood up slowly, picking up a small, silver digital recorder from the table. Inspector, Mr. Gu's narrative relies on a very specific lie, that I was an employee or a partner acting out of malice. The truth is much simpler. I was an investor protecting her assets from a failing management. Yangshan scoffed. We were at an all-time high, only because I was holding the ceiling up with my own hands. I countered. I pressed the play button on the recorder. The silence of the chamber was filled with the ambient noise of the Peninsula Hotel Gala from Chapter 1. Then, Yangshan's voice rang out, crystal clear and chillingly arrogant. The truth is, this company has outgrown you. This company doesn't need you anymore. In fact, nobody here does. If you want to keep your dignity, leave. I'll have my lawyers send the transition papers tomorrow. You're being phased out, Ruoshi. I stopped the recording. Inspector, under the Article 4 of the GU Group's internal bylaws, which Mr. GU himself drafted to ensure he could fire disloyal staff, any termination of a key stakeholder without a 90-day notice period triggers an immediate asset reclamation clause. By publicly firing me and stating the company didn't need me, Mr. GU legally and voluntarily severed the ties that held my capital and my patents to his firm. I didn't sabotage him, I simply followed his instructions to leave. Yangshan's lead lawyer whispered frantically in his ear. Yangshan pushed him away. That was a private dispute. It didn't give you the right to destroy the livelihoods of 5,000 employees. The livelihoods of those employees were destroyed by your incompetence. Yangshan, I said, my voice hardening, you spent the company's emergency reserves on a luxury yacht and a diamond you couldn't even afford to buy back from yourself. While you were playing CEO, I was the one paying the insurance premiums. When I left, the insurance left with me. I opened a thick folder and handed a set of documents to the bailiff to pass to the inspector. Furthermore, I continued, Mr. GU has alleged that I am a hostile force. He is partially correct. I am currently the holder of the GU Group's primary debt. I didn't just withdraw my money, I bought the distressed debt from the banks the moment the stock hit floor prices. I now own 85% of the GU Group's outstanding loans. Inspector Han raised an eyebrow. You own your ex-husband's debt. I do. And since the GU Group has missed its last 3 interest payments that were due because Mr. GU was busy trying to frame me rather than managing his cash flow, I am here today not as a defendant, but as the petitioner for a total liquidation. No, Yangshan roared, lunging toward the bench. You can't do that. That's my father's legacy. Your father's legacy was built on theft. As the evidence I submitted to the SEC this morning proves, I said, my voice as cold as a winter morning. The GU Group isn't a company anymore, Yangshan, it's a carcass. And I'm the only one with the legal right to bury it. Inspector Han looked over the documents, his expression shifting from neutral to grim. Mr. GU, the evidence is overwhelming. Ms. Shin's actions, while aggressive, are entirely within the bounds of the contracts you signed. Your allegation of criminal sabotage is dismissed. However, based on the forensic audit provided by Ms. Shin, I am opening a formal investigation into your misappropriation of corporate funds for personal use. Yangshan collapsed back into his seat, his face the color of parchment. He looked at me, and for the first time, I didn't see anger in his eyes. I saw a hollow, bottomless fear. He realized that the cold machine he had mocked was the only thing that had ever kept him safe from the world. Ruoshi, he whispered, his voice cracking. Please, I'll do anything. We can start over. I'll get rid of Shuyu. I'll give you the CEO chair. Just don't take everything. I gathered my things. Clicking my briefcase shut. You already gave me everything. Yangshan, you gave me the realization that I am more than a wife, more than a CFO, and infinitely more than a GU. I don't want your chair, I'm building my own tower. I walked out of the chamber, the sound of the inspector's gavel echoing behind me like the closing of a tomb. Outside, the sun was blindingly bright. Lu Jingshan was leaning against his car, a quiet, knowing smile on his face. How did it go? He asked. The law is a beautiful thing, Lu, I said, sliding into the passenger seat. It's so much more efficient than a scream. The air in the abandoned textile warehouse on the outskirts of the city was thick with the smell of mildew and rotted wood, a far cry from the sandalwood-scented hallways of the GU mansion. Rain leaked through the rusted corrugated roof, dripping onto the concrete floor with a relentless, hollow tap-tap-tap. I sat on a wooden crate, my hands unbound, watching the shadows. I hadn't been kidnapped in the traditional sense. I had walked into this trap with my eyes wide open. When Lin Shuyu's desperate, tear-stained face had appeared at my office window earlier that evening, pleading for a final talk to save Yangshan from prison, I knew it was a ruse. But I needed to see how far the White Lotus would wilt when the sun went down. You're remarkably calm for someone whose life is about to end in a tragic accident, a voice hissed from the darkness. Lin Shuyu stepped into the faint circle of light cast by a single swinging bulb. She looked haggard, the tools and silks were gone, replaced by a cheap trench coat. Behind her, two burly men with the vacant eyes of hired muscle shifted uncomfortably. Accidents require a level of competence you've yet to demonstrate. Shuyu, I said, checking my watch. You have 5 minutes before the silence becomes expensive. Shut up, she screamed, the sound echoing off the damp walls. You took everything. He was supposed to be my ticket to the top. We were going to be the it couple. But you dismantled him like he was nothing. You turned him into a pathetic, crying mess who does nothing but mutter your name in his sleep. I tilted my head. Is that why you brought me here? Because he's calling for the woman who actually built his world instead of the one who just decorated it. Shuyu pulled a small, jagged knife from her pocket. Her hand was shaking so violently the blade caught the light in a frantic dance. I'm going to make you sign a confession. You'll admit to the embezzlement. You'll return the patents. And then you're going to disappear. If I can't have the lifestyle I was promised, I'll at least make sure you rot in a cell. I looked at the two men behind her. How much is she paying you? The taller one grunted. 5 grand each, half up front. I'll give you 50,000 each to go have a nice dinner and forget you ever saw me, I said, my voice as casual as if I were ordering a latte. And another 10 if you give me your phones so I can record a little conversation. The men looked at each other. They weren't professionals. They were desperate men hired by a desperate girl. The logic of the paycheck won instantly. They stepped back, dropping their gazes, and placed their phones on a nearby crate. What are you doing? I'm the one who hired you, Shuyu shrieked, lunging toward them. They ignored her, disappearing into the shadows of the loading dock with a nod of gratitude toward me. Now it was just us, the architect and the ornament. You think money solves everything, Shuyu spat, turning back to me, the knife held out awkwardly. No, Shuyu. I think value solves everything. You have none. I stood up, walking toward her. She retreated, her heels catching on the uneven floor. Do you want to know the real reason Yangshan is a mess? It's not because I left, it's because he realized that without me, he has to look at people like you every day. He sees his own reflection in your greed and your shallow ambition, and it disgusts him. He loves me. He loves the idea of someone who doesn't ask him hard questions. I countered, but I have a gift for you. A little truth to keep you warm. I pulled my phone out and played a recording from the night of the auction. It was Yangshan's voice, caught by the bug I'd planted in his jacket during our confrontation. Shuyu, she's a distraction, a placeholder. Yangshan's voice crackled through the warehouse. I only kept her around to make Ruoshi jealous. The moment I get the company back, I'm dumping that vapid little girl in the street. She's nothing but a common social climber with the brains of a goldfish. The knife slipped from Shuyu's hand, clattering onto the concrete. She collapsed into a heap, her face buried in her hands. The White Lotus was finally crushed, not by my hand, but by the very man she had tried to steal. He said that, she sobbed. He said much worse. But I think you get the point. I picked up the knife by the handle and tucked it away. You were both using each other to fill a void where a soul should be. You're not a villain, Shuyu. You're just a footnote in a story that was never about you. I walked toward the exit, stopping at the door. The police will be here in 10 minutes. I've already sent them the GPS coordinates and the recording of your little kidnapping speech. If I were you, I'd use this time to think of a better role to play in your next life. The mistress character has a very poor survival rate in this city. I stepped out into the rain. A black sedan was waiting for me. Lu Jingshan was behind the wheel, his eyes scanning me for injuries. You took too long, he said, his voice laced with an unusual edge of concern. I had to wait for the third act, I replied, sliding into the warmth of the leather interior. The audience loves a good breakdown. As we drove away, I saw the blue and red lights of the police cars reflecting in the puddles. The warehouse shrank in the distance, a dark, rotting monument to a past I was finally, irrevocably done with. The VIP wing of this street, Jude Medical Center, was a fortress of silence, broken only by the rhythmic, mechanical sigh of ventilators and the muffled squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum. The air was sterile, smelling of ozone and the cold finality of an ending. I walked down the long corridor, my footsteps dampened by the thick carpet. I wasn't here for a merger or a confrontation. I was here for a goodbye, Grandfather GU. The man who had actually built the foundation of the GU group before his son and grandson began to erode it, was dying. He was the only person in that family who had ever looked at me with anything resembling respect, perhaps because he saw in me the ruthlessness he possessed. Outside the suite, GU Yangshan was slumped in a plastic chair. The aloof CEO was gone. In his place was a man whose skin looked like wet ash. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken into dark pits of despair. When he saw me, he stood up with a jolting, desperate energy. Ruoshi, you came, I knew you'd come. He tried to reach for my hand, but I shifted my briefcase, creating a physical barrier between us. I'm here to see the chairman, Yangshan, not you. Please, he whispered, his voice cracking. He's drifting in and out. The doctors say it's a matter of hours. He keeps asking about the company. He wants to know if the legacy is safe, if he thinks it's gone, if he thinks I failed. He won't pass in peace. He stepped closer, a frantic, sickly hope in his eyes. Just for 10 minutes, just pretend. Tell him the Aura merger was a success. Tell him we're still together. If he dies thinking the GU name is still at the top, I'll get the inheritance. I can use it to pay you back. I can fix everything. Please, Ruoshi. For the sake of the old man, I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of pity, not the kind that leads to mercy, but the kind you feel for a dying insect. You want me to lie to a dying man so you can secure a paycheck you've already squandered? I'm doing it for him, Yangshan insisted, his voice rising to a panicked hiss. He spent his life on that company. Do you want his last conscious thought to be that his grandson is a failure? The truth is never a cruelty. Yangshan, it's a reckoning. I pushed past him and entered the suite. The room was dim, the only light coming from the monitoring equipment. Grandfather GU lay amidst the white sheets, looking like a carving of ancient wood. His eyes flickered open as I approached. Ruoshi. His voice was a dry rattle. The girl with the iron soul. I'm here, Grandfather, I said, sitting by his bed. Yangshan hovered in the doorway, nodding at me, his eyes pleading. Lie to him. His expression screamed, save me. The company, the old man wheezed, his fingers twitching toward mine. Is the GU name still standing? I took his cold, thin hand in mine. I looked at Yangshan, who was holding his breath. The GU group as you knew it is gone, Grandfather, I said clearly. Yangshan let out a strangled groan, burying his face in his hands. It was built on a shadow, I continued, my voice steady. But I have taken the pieces that were worth saving, the people, the innovation, the spirit you started with. I have folded them into something new, something called Aura. Your legacy isn't a name on a building anymore, it's the fire I'm carrying forward. But Yangshan has no part in it. The old man's eyes searched mine. For a long moment, there was a terrifying silence. Then, slowly, the corners of his mouth twitched into a ghostly, satisfied smile. Good, he whispered. He was always too soft, like his father. You were the only true GU I ever had. His grip on my hand loosened. The line on the monitor began to flatten. Grandfather, Yangshan rushed to the bedside, but it was too late. The room was filled with the long, high-pitched drone of the heart rate monitor. The nurses rushed in, but I was already standing. Yangshan was on his knees by the bed, sobbing, not for the man who had died, but for the inheritance that had just evaporated, because in that final moment, the chairman hadn't signed the codicil Yangshan needed. He had died knowing his grandson was exactly what he was, a failure. I walked to the window and pulled a folded envelope from my pocket. I dropped it onto the nightstand next to Yangshan's trembling hands. "What is this?" he choked out. "A gift," I said. "It's a bankruptcy notice for your personal estate, and a copy of the final liquidation order for the GU Group. The banks are seizing the mansion, the cars, and the remaining accounts at midnight. You have 6 hours to find a place to sleep." "You killed him." Yangshan looked up, his face twisted with a hideous, pathetic rage. "You told him the truth and you killed him." "No. Yangshan, time killed him. You killed the company. I just performed the autopsy." I walked toward the door, pausing one last time. "Don't bother with a fancy funeral. You can't afford the flowers, and frankly, there's no one left to attend." I walked out of the hospital. The sterile smell of the corridor replaced by the scent of coming rain. Lu Jingshan was waiting by the entrance, holding a black umbrella. He didn't ask how it went, he just opened the car door, as we drove away. I looked back at the hospital tower. I felt no joy, no soaring triumph, just a deep, quiet sense of completion. The debt was paid, the ties were cut, the past was a ghost, and the future was a clean, white road stretching out into the dark. The rooftop of the Aura Tower felt like the edge of the world. At 60 stories high, the wind roared with a clean, biting intensity, whipping my hair back from my face. Below us, the city was a sprawling tapestry of electric veins, gold, white, and neon. For 5 years, I had looked at this skyline from the shadow of the GU mansion. Tonight, the skyline was looking back at me. It was the inauguration of Aura International. The elite of the global tech world were gathered in the glass-domed gala hall just one floor below. But I had stepped out onto the helipad for a moment of silence. The view is different when you own the air, isn't it? Lu Jingshan stepped out from the stairwell, his hands tucked into the pockets of his tuxedo. He didn't approach me with the suffocating possessiveness I had grown used to with Yangshan. He stood 5 feet away, a respectful distance that acknowledged my sovereignty. "It's quieter," I said, looking out at the horizon. I used to think success was a noise, applause, shouting. The sound of a closing deal, but true success is this, the silence of having nothing left to prove. "You've become the talk of 3 continents in 12 months. Ruoshi," Lu said, a rare, genuine smile softening his icy features. "The woman who dismantled a dynasty and built an empire on its ashes. They're calling you the architect of the new order." I turned to him, the wind catching the silk of my crimson gown. "I didn't do it to be the talk of the town, Lu. I did it because I was tired of being the secret behind someone else's smile." Suddenly, the heavy metal door to the roof creaked open. A man stumbled out, intercepted immediately by my security detail. He was disheveled, wearing a coat that had seen better days, his face gaunt and unshaven. It was GU Yangshan. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a man who had spent the last year living in the shadow of his own ghost. He had managed to slip past the lower security, perhaps using an old service pass he'd kept as a pathetic memento. "Let him through," I said, my voice carrying over the wind. The guard stepped back. Yangshan stumbled forward, stopping at the edge of the helipad. He looked at me, then at the massive Aura logo glowing in blue neon behind me. He looked at Lu Jingshan, then finally down at his own trembling hands. "I saw the news," Yangshan rasped, his voice thin and broken. "The IPO. It's the biggest in a decade. You really did it. I told you I would." "Yangshan," I said, my voice devoid of malice, "I told you the day I left. I'm working as a clerk now," he said, a bitter, hysterical laugh escaping his lips. "In a logistics firm. I spend all day filing the paperwork for the shipping routes you designed. Every time I see your name on a digital signature, it's like a knife in my chest." He took a step closer, his eyes wet with a desperate, delayed realization. "Ruoshi. I was wrong. I didn't just lose a company. I lost the only thing that made me a man. I thought I was the sun and you were just the moon reflecting my light. But I was the one in the dark all along. Please, just tell me there's a way back. I'll work for you. I'll be your lowest assistant. I just want to be near that light again." I looked at him, at the man I had once loved, the man I had protected, the man who had tried to erase me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't even feel the satisfaction of revenge. I felt nothing but the vast, cold distance of the years. There is no way back, Yangshan, I said, and the words felt like a benediction, because the woman you knew, the one who would have sacrificed everything to save you, is dead. You killed her in that ballroom a year ago, and the woman standing here now, she doesn't have a vacancy for a ghost. I walked toward him, stopping just inches away. I reached out and straightened his frayed collar. A final, mocking echo of the wife I used to be. The company didn't need me, Yangshan, but the world did, and more importantly, I needed me. I turned my back on him, walking toward the edge of the roof where the press cameras were beginning to flash from the hovering news drones. Guards, see Mr. GU to the street, I said, and give him a cab voucher. It's a long walk back to the life he chose. As Yangshan was led away, his quiet sobs lost in the roar of the city wind. Lu Jingshan stepped up beside me. He held out a glass of champagne. To the future, he asked. I took the glass, the bubbles rising like tiny stars. I looked at Lu, a man who was my equal, a man who didn't want to own me, but to walk beside me. No, I said, clinking my glass against his. To the present. The future is just a series of nows that I finally control. I stepped toward the microphone set up for the global broadcast. Millions of people were watching. I didn't talk about revenge. I didn't talk about the GU group. I looked directly into the lens and spoke to every woman who had ever been told she was just a supporter, just a wife, or just the brains in the background. Success isn't about the throne you sit on, I said, my voice clear and resonant across the world. It's about the strength it took to walk away from the one that was too small for you. My name is Shinruoshi, and I am just getting started. I stepped back. The applause from the gala below rising up like a tide. I felt the warmth of the spotlights, the cool touch of the night air, and the steady beat of a heart that finally belonged entirely to itself. The story of the GU family was over. My story had only just begun.